Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are here today to talk about the Michelson Spark Grants Smart Justice funding cycle. Before we do that, we'll give some quick introductions to ourselves. My name is Ryan Erickson Kulas. I am the programs director here at the Michelson 20mm Foundation. So I work with our Smart Justice program as well as a variety of our other programs to help set strategic goals, growth, as well as provide oversight in our grant making process. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Danny.
Sorry about that. I couldn't find the mute button. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Danny Murillo. I am the Smart Justice Fellow at the campaign at the Michelson 20mm Foundation. I'm leading their higher education work around Smart Justice Initiative and working with a group of folks around the state to establish a set of guiding principles that will be the foundation of kind of an overarching theme of how to support and incarcerated and formerly incarcerated students. Thank you for being here today.
All right, and we can go to the next slide. So this is just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. First, I'll give a little background and history about the Michelson 20mm Foundation. Then we'll discuss the particulars of our Spark Grant program and how that operates. Finally, we'll look at a review of the application process for the Spark Grants, as well as looking at previous awardees so that you all can get a sense of the types of projects and the type of work that we fund. And then at the very end, we'll leave it open for about probably 15, 20-ish minutes of Q&A. If you do have a question throughout the presentation, please go ahead and drop it within the Q&A. And then we will go at the end of the conversation back through all those questions that are dropped in the Q&A and answer them. Next slide. So the Michelson 20mm Foundation was founded by Dr. Gary K. Michelson. Dr. Michelson is a retired orthopedic spinal surgeon who made his fortune in inventing medical devices and then patenting those devices. He's since retired from medicine and has devoted himself to philanthropy. He is a signer of the Giving Pledge, and along with the Michelson 20mm Foundation, he supports and funds other foundations within the philanthropic space devoted to animal welfare, medical research, as well as a variety of other initiatives. Our foundation got its start just over a decade ago when Dr. Michelson saw a story in a local newspaper about students at Santa Ana College here in California who are unable to complete their educational journey simply because of the high cost of textbooks. At the time, he created a scholarship fund, but was looking for a more long-lasting solution. And so from those efforts, germinated the Michelson 20mm Foundation. Next slide. And this is the mission of our organization. We're really looking to make progress towards a more just world, particularly through equitable education and economic opportunities for all students. And you'll see that reflected in the different buckets of work that we call our initiatives that we focus our efforts on. Next slide. So the first initiative that I'll talk about is the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property. As I mentioned, Dr. Michelson made his fortune in inventing medical devices and then patenting those devices. And so he is passionate about bringing intellectual property education to the masses, to entrepreneurs, students, people within a business school setting, to make sure that they have the knowledge to be able to capitalize on their IP, similar to how Dr. Michelson did. The Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property operates a curriculum that can be built into existing courses. We've actually had courses designed around the entire curriculum at USC as well as some other schools, but a tremendous resource for business students, entrepreneurs, inventors, etc. Next slide. Another area of work that we do is our impact investing work. So these are equity stakes in for-profit companies that are mission aligned. Generally, they are within the ed tech space, and they are looking to kind of impact post-secondary and or future of work sectors. Our most recent impact investing cohort was with Village Capital around future of work. Next slide. So I'll briefly touch on some of the other initiatives that our foundation focuses on. Obviously, today is focused on our smart justice work, but I wanted to give you all a sense of the different types of work that we do. And these other initiatives, we will be having Spark grant cycles focused on them across 2022. So each quarter will have a different focus. So the first is our Open Educational Resources Initiative. As I mentioned, the high cost of textbooks was what got Dr. Michelson interested in the higher education and affordability space. So we look to advance the use of OER, which are openly licensed textbooks that are generally free to download for students, and have the ability to not only improve affordability of instructional materials, but also the efficacy of those materials. Our Student Basic Needs Initiatives looks at some of the challenges that students are facing as they work to complete their educational journey, be it housing, food insecurity, et cetera. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the grantees that we've had within each of these spaces so that you all will get a better sense of the work that we've supported. And then the last one that I'll mention before we transition into smart justice is our digital equity work. This actually really sprung out of the pandemic and how all higher education is essentially shifted to remote education, but realizing that students across the state of California didn't have access on an equal level based on where they were to high-speed internet. And so our digital equity initiative looks to bridge that digital divide for students within California. Next slide. And then the last initiative that I'll mention, and the one that we're all here today to talk about, is our Smart Justice Initiative. We really look at the intersection of the higher education system and the criminal justice system, and look to ways which we can provide educational and vocational training opportunities to students that are both currently incarcerated as well as formerly incarcerated. We do that through grant funding, policy efforts, as well as convening collaboratives of work. Next slide. I'll turn it over to my colleague Danny to walk us through a little bit about kind of what our Spark grant process looks like.
For sure, thank you, Ryan. So the Spark grant is an innovative, just-in-time grant making process. What that means is that the grant seeks to meet the urgent needs of organizations aligned with our smart justice funding focus areas, which we'll discuss shortly. Our vision is to introduce a process that can fill urgent needs specifically for nonprofit organizations and post-secondary education institutions aligned with our focus areas. We seek to fund highly impactful initiatives that would not be possible if they needed to wait through a traditional grant decision timeline, which can sometimes be timely, right? So we try to be timely and quick in terms of our turnaround process. We usually fund between 4 to 6 grants, and I believe last year there was a total around 37 grants that were part of the grant cycle. Next slide, please. So we will not be funding with the Spark grant, would not be funding initiatives that will result in direct assistance to students during the Michelson Spark grant, such as student aid, laptops, and hotspots for remote learning. You know, although we understand that these are very important issues that need to be addressed, you know, we are looking more for a little bit more broadly things that we'll be touching on shortly when we get into our focus, our full focus areas regarding the grant cycle. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Ryan to kind of walk us through the next steps.
Great. Thank you, Danny. The one thing that I'll also kind of add on to what Danny had mentioned within this program, institutions of higher education are also eligible for these funds. So oftentimes it's a nonprofit working with an educational institution. Sometimes it is a foundation of an educational institution applying for a grant. We're certainly able to work with educational institutions. We are looking to impact organizations that are doing work in California. You don't necessarily have to be based within California, but the project that you would submit for this work should have an impact on populations within California. And then as Danny mentioned, we're looking probably to fund anywhere between 3 to 6 grants this cycle. Generally, we see about 35 or so proposals come in over the course of the call for proposals. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we look at and how we evaluate proposals as they come in. Next slide. And we really have 6 dimensions of evaluation, and we'll look at each of these very quickly. But first we have baseline criteria, focus area alignment, potential impact of the grant, what that measurability of the impact is, long-term organizational sustainability, and then finally scalability of project. And we'll just quickly dive into each of these just to get a better sense of what we're looking for. Next slide. So baseline criteria. Our grants are up to $25,000. So we ask organizations to submit as to what dollar amount they are requesting. Our grants are project-based. So we are asking for organizations to submit a proposal around what they would be using our funds for. The types of things that we're often interested in is a new partnership, a pilot program, things that need to be sort of proven out or get some cash over the hump. We don't fund general operating expense grants. So again, these would have to be sort of project specific. Generally, we are looking for a project that will come to fruition within a 6-month to 1-year timeframe. From time to time, we've had things stretch to an 18-month or 2-year grant. But again, sort of the ethos of Spark Grant is this kind of rapid infusion of cash, which would be needed. 2 things that I should mention, we do allow funds to be utilized for staff salary and staff time. So if you are allocating a staff member on this project that they maybe wouldn't be doing already, and you're using these grant funds to cover that, that's totally workable within our framework. The other thing is we are also open to having our funds combined with other grant dollars. So if there is a project that perhaps is larger than $25,000, but our dollars would be a piece of that project, we're open to that. We would be interested to learn a little bit more about sort of what the overall budget is, where those other kind of revenue streams are coming from, but that is something that we're open to. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Danny, who will talk a little bit about what are those focus areas that we're looking for projects to be submitted in. Danny?
Thank you. Yes, so yes, in terms of our focus areas for this Michelson Spark Grant round, as we mentioned earlier, this Michelson Spark Grant is focused on innovative efforts that help advance our focus areas that impact post-secondary education in prison and on-campus support for formerly incarcerated students. For this round, the Michelson Spark Grant, we're hoping to receive letters of interest around efforts that address the following, right? Expanding access to professional development opportunities for staff, elevating the voices of justice impacted leaders so that they can play a role in educating policy makers and on the measures needed to support the student population. Also, research on best practices for higher education institution. Next slide. As well as supporting soon to be released or recently released individuals with reentry services, including transitional housing, employment, and college transfer support for students who are enrolled in a post-secondary education program while in prison. So yeah, these are our four focus areas that we're going to be focusing on, and a lot of these ones, areas can also kind of be broken down into like other smaller segments, like for instance, like the last one, right, where the reentry services is kind of a broad kind of concept, right, that kind of touches on different themes, right, transitional housing and employment. So thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Ryan.
Thank you, Danny. One thing that I will mention is, this is really the meat and potatoes of what we are looking to fund. So what we do is we ask organizations, and if we could switch back to the previous slide, just so that people can see that. So we'll ask organizations to select one or multiple of these focus areas that their project would address. We have in the past had people submit, oh, it hits 2 of the 4, 3 of the 4. That doesn't necessarily increase your chances of being funded. We're much more likely to fund sort of one that is well aligned with one of those focus areas. And we can go to the next slide just so people can see that last focus area, as opposed to, tangentially hitting all 4. So I just kind of wanted to clarify that because that is a question that we often see. And again, please add your Q&As into the Q&A. I see one, will this presentation be made available after the webinar? Yes, it will be. We will put the recording on our website. It will also be emailed out to registrants as well as the slides. Speaking of slides, let's go to the next one. So, the other thing that we are looking for is what is the impact of the grant? And what we do is we ask organizations to provide how they will be measuring the impact of the grant. So, what will, how many individuals will this impact in the best case, in the worst case? What is the current budget of the overall project versus what is the grant dollars? What is the timeline that those will be both dispersed, as well as what is the timeline for the impact? Next slide. Measurability of impact. So we're really interested in learning more about, again, what those proposed metrics are, how effective they're going to be in actually measuring the success. What is the realistic chance that this project will have that impact, and looking at that timeline again. Next slide. The other thing that we're really curious about is, you as an organization, who are your current partners? Who are your members of the team? Who are the people who are going to be sort of executing upon this work? Will you be utilizing, a coalition of organizations that will be helping you? Do you have, what are your current revenue streams? We're very curious about additional grant funding that you've received, how you've executed on those grants. So another aspect of kind of what we evaluate when looking at proposals. Next slide. And then the last thing that I'll mention, and this is probably outside of kind of alignment with the focus areas, one of the more important aspects, which is scalability of a project. We are generally interested in funding programs that have the capacity to scale. So if we are evaluating a project that has impact at X number of students at one campus, or has the ability to impact X number of students across many campuses, we're going to tend towards that one that could impact many. Now, oftentimes we have funded pilot programs. So perhaps the work is getting started at one campus, but 2, 3, 5 years down the line, you all see this work as scaling across multiple campuses or scaling across multiple geographic regions. We're certainly open and interested to hearing about that. Again, we would just be kind of looking to determine what that scalability looks like, whether or not it's feasible, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead, next slide, please. I believe I'll turn it over to Danny, who will kind of walk us through some of the more nuts and bolts of how to apply and things along those lines.
For sure. Thank you, Ryan. So yeah, I'm gonna take a moment to talk about the application process and what that looks like. The portal opens on it goes live November 11th through the 1st. At the moment, the page to submit your application is not live, but you can still access the letter of interest, or the letter of inquiry, and also the full application on the website. I'm not sure if, correct me if I'm wrong though, Ryan, do we still accept applications up until December 1st at 11:59 Pacific Standard Time?
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha. So yes, we're still, up to 11:59 Pacific Standard Time. You can still submit your application. And we are reviewing applications on an ongoing basis, so apply early. And once you submit your your letter of inquiry, you'll receive a copy, which you will submit with the letter of interest, which is the first thing. What you will submit with your letter of interest, which is the first thing that you're going to be submitting, right? Is a 500-word abstract describing your project and the impact that you intend to have in the field. And also, copies are available now, as I mentioned, of the application. You can download them on PDF, right? And it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect once the application goes live. Next slide, please. So yes, once the application goes live and you intend to apply, you'll need to submit your application through our grant management platform, which is Submittable. As part of this process, you'll be asked to create an account. It's very important to know that when you create your Submittable account, remember to whitelist Submittable in your email client. We will share information on how to do that. You will also have to do this. You'll have to do this process so that you'll be able to receive emails from us. If you have technical issues with the platform, we highly encourage you to contact Submittable at the email on the screen, which is support@submittable.com. And then for issues or questions with the letter of inquiry and the application process, then please feel free to reach out to Ryan and to myself, and we'll include our email at the end. And I believe Ryan just dropped a link to Submittable. And I think that's it on my end, and I'm going to pass it back to Ryan. Oh, no, you know what? I'm actually going to go through the next couple slides, right?
Yes, I'll just quickly jump in, Danny. Yes, so I just dropped a link to how to safe list Submittable within your email submissions. And that you'll see again, if you do submit an LOI, we'll be prompted to do that. And then just one quick correction. Thank you to my colleague, Jen. There was a typo on this presentation. So the call for proposals will actually open on November 10th. But we will close it on that December 1st timeframe. So again, to clarify, November 10th is the first day, so an extra day to submit those proposals. But back to you, Danny.
For sure. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is our Spark Grant Committee team. Ryan and myself are half of that team, or half of the committee. The other two members of our committee are CEO Phil Kim and COO Mayra Lombrera. And so we'll be the ones reviewing the applications and the letter of inquiry. Next slide, please. So here's a brief overview of what the evaluation process entails. In our previous slide, Ryan touched on some of the metrics and the rubric that we'll be using for the evaluation. After submitting your letter of inquiry, the grant committee will do an initial assessment. And within 6 business days, you'll get an email with information, informing you if you are moving forward in the grant process or not. Usually about 25% of the letters of inquiry move on to the second round, which requires that you submit a full application, which, as I mentioned, is available to download on our website. Once the application, on the application, besides the general questions that are listed on there, we will be asking specific questions based on our review of your letter of inquiry that you submitted, right? And so after the second review, we will invite finalists to a Zoom conversation where the committee team will do a final evaluation with all of the finalists. Next slide, please. So our goal is to complete this process within 15 business days from the day of the grant application closing, along with informing those who have been awarded a Spark grant. We intentionally designed this process to be mindful of your time and resources during this critical time. And then next slide. So the next couple of slides will feature some of our past grantees. So can we go to the next slide? So yes, our first one on the list was a grant that was made available to the Campaign for College Opportunity that was used to support the work that was being done on the possibility report, which was authored by me while I was an employee of the Campaign for College Opportunity. And the report highlights kind of charts the services, talks about, the services that are being provided for students incarcerated, students on campus. We did a focus group with about 39 formerly incarcerated students from all three segments of California's higher education system. And it's been released since, I believe, since February of 2021, sorry. And yeah, so now I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Ryan, and he'll be kind of going over some of the other grants that are available. Or I mean, past grantees, sorry.
Great, next slide, please. So another grant that we've awarded within our Smart Justice portfolio was to the Forest and Fire Recruitment Program. So they're an organization that works to support people who are currently incarcerated as well as formerly incarcerated get careers within wildland and forestry work. Oftentimes these individuals are relied upon to fight fires while they are incarcerated, but then see a lot of barriers to be able to get those jobs upon release. So FFRP was sort of one of those examples of an innovative program that was kind of starting in on their second cohort of graduates. And we wanted to support them kind of as a pilot to test out this model as to how it can be effective in implementing change from a vocational licensing perspective. Next slide. Very similar with Impact Justice. So Impact Justice launched their California Justice Leaders Program, and we funded the initial launch of that program. It was the first ever AmeriCorps program specifically designed for people who have been involved within the criminal justice system. Again, another example of sort of us interested in seeding an initial pilot or seeding an initial sort of growth of the work to prove out a particular model. Next slide. So the RAND Corporation, a different type of grant, but I think still one that is effective. We provided them with funds to develop an educational guidebook specifically for people who work within a corrections facility. And it gave them best practices around how to implement a high quality college program in prison. So if corrections officials were looking to start a program, or if corrections officials were looking to improve upon a program, this resource was a great value to them. This is an example of a type of effort that sort of spans across, is very scalable, where multiple college facilities could benefit from this. Next slide. We gave a grant to UCI to support their UCI Lifted program. This is a program that in next fall, we'll have the first cohort of UC bachelor students within a prison setting. This hasn't necessarily been done before within the UC setting. We were one of the earliest funders of this work. Obviously, this type of activity takes a lot more than $25,000. But our initial dollars came in and then sort of seeded other philanthropic entities to support the work of this program. And those students are currently students at Southwest College. They're going to matriculate to UCI within the fall of 2022. Next slide. So the last grant that I will mention sort of around our smart justice work, and then I am going to talk about a few other grants that I think do a good job of encapsulating the types of projects we're interested, even though they're not smart justice, is this grant to the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges, as well as the foundation. So this was a grant to produce training materials, modules, and have a statewide training for the 250 plus faculty that are teaching within prison settings. Again, the goal being to give professional development opportunities to those faculty and make sure that they are prepared effectively in order to really impact students within a prison setting. Again, this is a great example of our grant dollars coming in early. Other foundations saw the value in this work and came on to support. And in the fall of 2022, the leaders of these efforts are going to be going around the state and providing trainings across the state to these faculty members. Next slide. So I'll quickly wrap up with some additional grants that we have funded, not within the smart justice space, but again, I think gives a good sense of encapsulating the type of grant giving that we do. And then at the end, we'll have questions. Again, if you have questions, please make sure you add them within the Q&A. We're about to get to them in the next 5 minutes or so. Next slide. So the first non-smart justice grant I'll mention is to SoCal CAN, or the Southern California College Access Network. This was given under our student basic needs umbrellas. Our grant established what they refer to as the Let's Go to College CA Student Fellowship. So there's an opportunity for students to be paid, have leadership opportunities across the state, and then raise awareness around particular issues that were impacting students within the student basic needs space. SNAP benefits, non-tuition costs of college, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of elevating the voices of students and allowing them to really educate stakeholders around what is important for them. Next slide. CSULB was another grant given out under our student basic needs umbrella. They're in the process of developing a best practice model for a family-friendly campus, primarily focused on pregnant and parenting students. This training resource is one that will be developed at Cal State Long Beach, but has the kind of goal of spreading across the CSU system as a part of their basic needs initiative. So again, a great example of work being done on one campus, but the goal is not to just impact that one campus, it's to impact the broad space. Next slide. And then I always enjoy highlighting these two grants to TrustWest because I think they are great around the kind of ethos of Spark Grant, meaning a quick moment in time where funds are going to be most effectively utilized. The first grant that we give to TrustWest was one of our earliest grants as an organization. That was to create a California Digital Financial Aid Awareness Toolkit. At the time, this was about 2 or 3 years ago, the state of California had just passed a law saying that students prior to graduation needed to be provided information about FAFSA and California DREAM Act applications. The long-term goal being if they were provided with that information, they would be more likely to apply. What our funds did was support a toolkit that was given across the state to high schools with best practices. So TrustWest looked at what are districts who historically shouldn't have high FAFSA completion rates, but do. What are they doing well? And then taking those lessons and providing them to schools across the state as they look to prep for this requirement. The second grant was just as COVID kind of started in the middle of 2020. And the grant looked at what higher education institutions were doing to support their students. So they were surveying students from across the state. They also created a digital map that sort of illustrated what the gaps are around access to digital content and quality distance learning. And that, of course, sort of drove a lot of efforts around policy change and talking about the issue of the digital divide over the course of this past year and a half. Next slide. And then the last grant that I'll mention before we open it up into the Q&A is to US Public Interest Research Group, or USPSPRG. We funded them under our Open Educational Resources umbrella. And in 2020, they created a report looking at the textbook industry's new revenue model called automatic billing, or also inclusive access, how that was impacting students, and sort of what were some of the troubling concerns with this new practice, particularly when it comes to student affordability, student data rights, et cetera, et cetera. This report has spurred multiple pieces of legislation in California, in Texas. There have also been institutions across the country who have utilized the findings of those reports to push back on automatic textbook billing at their institution. So again, a research report that had the ability to kind of scale across the space and have impact. Next slide. So that does it for sort of our pre-prepared materials. We'll open it up for questions right now. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A. I have Danny and my email address listed up here as well. We're more than happy to answer any questions via email. We're also available to have phone conversations in advance of someone submitting a proposal, if that would be helpful. Oftentimes I like to have conversations, quick 30-minute calls, or email back and forth to say, an organization says, hey, we're interested in submitting this project. Do you think that it would be a good fit? And I can say something along the lines of, oh yes, definitely, please make sure you include information X, Y, and Z to provide us with a full picture. Or maybe it's, I don't know if that's the right fit for us right now. And then that way it sort of, saves time on the part of the organization as to, instead of just submitting the proposal, they can sort of get that feedback early on. So happy to have those conversations via email. But I'll hop into the Q&A right now. So let's see. If you've been awarded a grant in a different cycle, can you apply for this grant for funding for different work focused on the formerly incarcerated students specifically? Yes, that shouldn't be an issue. Certainly, I think maybe reach out. If we just awarded you a grant, let's say in our past student basic needs cycle, we might be interested in kind of just hearing a little bit more about kind of what the ongoing work looks like versus what this new project is, but it would not disqualify you in any stretch. Can you please elaborate on indirect versus direct aid for students? So really, we're kind of not looking to have these funds go directly to students. So say in the form of, gift cards for students who have recently been released, or laptops to help students be successful. We realize that those types of funding is vital and is important, but for our funding kind of rubric, we generally look for giving that is a bit more sustainable and has the ability to be more impactful than one student getting $500 for one individual laptop. Again, happy to provide any details around your specific project if you have specific items kind of thinking about that I'm not addressing here. We are not affiliated with a college or university. If our program work focuses on re-entry employment preparation and post-release support, do we qualify to apply? Yes, definitely would qualify to apply. We would just, as long as you are a 501c3 or maybe associated with a 501c3, if you have specific questions about that, or if there are nuances to your specific situation, again, feel free to reach out and email us. Are you seeking to support specifically students who have survived incarceration, or to support students, or to support both students who have survived incarceration and students without that experience? So our work within the Smart Justice kind of initiative is focused on people who have had experiences with the criminal justice system. Generally, that is, they've been incarcerated. And I would say that's kind of our primary focus for the work. If there is work that you're doing with students who have not been incarcerated but are still impacted by the criminal justice system, I'd be happy to have a conversation or just learn a little bit more about what that looks like. But I would say, yeah, generally we're looking for students who are either formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated. Do we need to get a response from the letter of inquiry in order to apply? Yeah, great question. So to kind of clarify our process, the first thing that you would do would be submit a letter of a letter of inquiry. As Danny mentioned, that is, there's some biographical, name, organization, website, but that really is just a 500-word abstract around what your project proposal is. Copies of the LOI are currently available on the Spark Grant website, which I know I linked in the chat earlier, and maybe my colleague Rachel can pop it in the chat again. But you can download copies of that right now. And then if we review your LOI and make the determination that you would advance to an application, that's when we would reach out to you and we would ask you to submit a full application. A full application is available for viewing. So if you wanted to take a look to see the types of questions that you would be asked, you can, but you would be invited to fill that out. Additionally, we will have specific questions based on what you put in the LOI for that application as well. So in addition to the questions that are sort of stock, which are you can see on that application, you would also get specific questions based on your LOI. Can you screen share the documents while you are sharing? I'm a bit confused as to what the LOI is and what the application is. Would be nice to see. Yeah, Rachel, do you want to go back to the page you were just on, which was the Spark Grant webpage and live? Just so kind of we can get some clarity. I can also do it, if that might, oh, there we go. So as you can see on this page right here, if you hover over the letter of interest, that will be the link to the LOI where you can review it. And then if you click on full application, you will also get a copy of that full application. Note, you will still submit within Submittable. These are just sort of the questions for you all to be able to prepare in advance. But within probably the next 2 to 3 days, that register for the webinar button will be replaced with a submittable button, and then you'll be able to start submitting on November 10th. But you can download there and get that information in advance. Thanks, Rachel. For the fourth focus area, do we have to provide support with all 3 reentry services, housing, employment, and college transfer support? I would say no, Danny. I think, right, we just listed those options as the types of support, but I don't think that our expectation is that, a project would be hitting on, housing, employment, and college transfer support. If your work does that, great, and definitely let us know, but you would only need to be under sort of one of those subsets. Under the second focus area, do the young people we work with have to be enrolled in post-secondary education themselves for us to be eligible? And just to clarify, the second one is elevating the voices of justice-impacted student leaders so they can play a role in educating policymakers on the measures needed to support this student population. I don't think that they would, Danny, I'd be curious to get your opinions on this. I don't know if they would need to be currently enrolled. I mean, I think that would be the preference. If they were recently kind of, graduated or recently not involved in college, that would be acceptable. But I think we would want them to have, some experience with, college, because they're kind of raising the voices around, the issues that affect students.
Well, I know that, we also talked about kind of like the reentry component, right? As in the previous question, right? I would kind of going back to the previous question, I would rather support an organization that is doing one thing well than spreading itself thin, trying to do all of the other things, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. But anyway, to this question, there's also, possibly supporting incarcerated youth that are transitioning out, through some of the programs. There are some colleges, that are teaching AA degree track programs in some of the youth correctional facilities as well.
Mm-hmm. The December 1st deadline is for the LOI, or is the idea we submit the LOI well before the December 1st deadline? So yes, that December 1st deadline is to get your initial proposal in, which would be your LOI. obviously we encourage you to submit in advance of that deadline. But whenever you sort of submit your LOI, that will start our clock going as to, we'll within 6 business days, get back to you as to whether that LOI advances to an application or not. Full transparency, we often generally see a ton of submissions come in within the past last 3 days of a cycle being open. So we always try to encourage people to apply early, but I realize that there are, competing deadlines and things like that. What is an example of general operational needs? You mentioned you don't provide support for general operations. So again, we would be looking for our grant to fund a specific project as opposed to kind of giving out a general operating support grant. If you're unfamiliar, those are the types of grants that are generally given with little to no strings, I guess. For us, it is, these dollars are attached to a specific work or a specific project that you would be kind of doing. So hopefully that provides some clarification. Is it allowed for us to partner directly with local probation and state parole agencies? Yes, certainly. No concerns or issues with that. And we'd definitely be interested in learning about, who those partners are, how they would help support the work or the project. We are not affiliated with a college or university. If our project focuses on re-entry employment preparation and post-release support, do we still qualify? Yes, certainly. I think you'd still be eligible.
And and the reason why that's important, because although you might not be doing direct educational support, the services that you do provide are possibly supporting a formerly incarcerated student to continue their education.
Yeah, that's a great point. When will funds be dispersed if awarded? So most likely that will be dispersed in early January, just given sort of like the holidays and things like that. My guess would be early January is when those funds would go out. To clarify, can you elaborate on the application process, the difference between the LOI and proposal? And if I understand correctly, we submit the LOI now and you let us know if we can submit a grant. Yes, so the first step is that LOI. You submit an LOI, you wait to hear as to whether or not we were inviting you to a full application. When I use the term proposal, I guess I'm just talking about kind of like the general idea. So I'll use that kind of throughout the process. But the first step is LOI. You would then be invited to submit a full application. You would then be invited to a finalist call. And then after that is kind of the decision around dollars being awarded. Would a one-time conference, hopefully the first of many, that aims to bring together stakeholders working on expanding educational opportunities for formerly incarcerated people, fit within the cycle's objectives? Yeah, I would say so. I think it would, probably fall under maybe 3 of the 4 focus areas. I think we'd be curious to learn a little bit about, why is there a need for this conference in this space? What is it able to provide that maybe other gatherings or convenings are not able to provide? But certainly would be interested in learning more about kind of that general idea. Is it beneficial to get your LOI submitted on the first day, or will all entries be assessed when the LOI portal closes? Great question. So we will be reviewing LOIs as they come in. I don't think there is, a huge benefit one way or the other, but we will assess LOIs as they come in. However, our awardee cohort will be finalized within 3 weeks of that December 1st timeline. So even if you get your LOI in, you may wait that 3-week period, or you may kind of have the determination of your grant dollars being awarded. Again, I would encourage people to apply early, because oftentimes we see a huge glut at the end. And so getting there earlier kind of allows us to spend our time, do our due diligence on the proposal. I'm sorry if this has already been answered, no problem. Can funds go towards salaries of staff serving youth and or staff supervising volunteer mentors serving? Yes, so funds can be awarded towards the salaries of staff if you're utilizing them for whatever project you are proposing. If approximately 3 to 6 will receive grants and you have approximately 36 applications in this data, are all of these 36 applicants filling out a full grant, or is the number who will fill out the full grant significantly less? Yes, so generally, we receive 35, 36 proposals in a form of an LOI. And then generally of those, we advance about 25% to a full application. And then our final awardee cohort is anywhere from 3 to 6 grants. Again, those numbers fluctuate dramatically, kind of based on cycles and sort of things like that. But the past few cycles, we've seen that sweet spot of around 35. And then again, 25% of those 35 advance to a full application. So math of that is going to be, 7 to 11, I want to say, are invited to a full application. Hopefully that math was right early on a Wednesday morning. What is the term for this cycle when funds would need to be spent? Good question. So we generally look to have our dollars spent over the course of a 6-month to 1-year timeline, but we do ask potential grantees to kind of tell us what that timeline is going to be. We've had proposals that have gone 18 months. I think maybe the longest is 2 years. Anything really beyond that time frame, I don't think is right for kind of what we're looking to do, where again, it's sort of that, time sensitive dollars coming in. And then what is the amount awarded for the grant and how many are awarded? So the grant is up to $25,000 and we look to award anywhere from 3 to 6 grants per funding cycle. And I saw a couple of things in the chat, so let me just make sure. Okay, we answered that one. For clarification, we work with some young people who have been incarcerated that help advocate for education in juvenile halls, but aren't necessarily currently enrolled in college. Yeah, I would, that should qualify, Tristan, around what we're interested in. Great, well, I think that is everything. I really appreciate everyone's time today. If you have specific questions around your proposal or anything that we didn't answer, please feel free to email us. Our email's on the screen, and we will also be sending out a recording of this video, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel as well, and sharing the slides. So thank you all very much for coming, and we'll end it there. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all. Have a good day.